Today we're going to talk about deep practice. And really, deep practice is just the idea of taking a really complicated or difficult to master skill, movement, idea, concept, whatever thing that you want to accomplish. And deep practice describes the practice, the best way to practice, the best way to go about and accomplish getting after something that may be difficult to master. And there are 3 steps to deep practice. The first step is chunk it up. So first you want to absorb the whole skill. What's the big overarching skill, movement, whatever that you're trying to learn. Absorb the whole skill, and try and figure out what those different parts are, and then break that skill into chunks to work on one chunk at a time. Don't try and work on the whole skill at a time, just work on one chunk at a time. If we're talking about trying to get better at freestyle, we're going to start by maybe just trying to get better at kick and just focus on getting better at kick, and then get really good at kick before we start incorporating other things into practice with our kick. Because breaking that skill, that movement, whatever it is, into chunk allows us to have deeper and more intense focus on what we're trying to master. And then we want to make sure that we're slowing it down. We don't want to overspeed practice things. We don't really even want to practice things at the speed that we're going to try and do them at, because breaking it down and being able to do it really, really slowly allows you to connect, to find the blueprints about how it's all going to fit together, how that one particular skill comes together, and then how all those skills that we broke into chunks come together to form the ultimate skill that we're trying to accomplish. Step 2 is repeat it. There is no substitute for focused, attentive repetition. Every time you do something, an impulse shoots down the nerve that fires whatever movement or action that you're doing. And the more that you fire that impulse, the more that you're building something called myelin around your nerves, and the more myelin you build, the easier it is to do that action every time you do it. And that leads us to step 3, which is learn to feel it. As you increase the myelin around the nerve, it's easier and faster for that nerve to fire, and things feel more and more fluid. And of course, that's our ultimate goal, right? To get things to feel more and more fluid. But what it also helps us do is it helps us feel when we know something's wrong. And it should bother you when something's wrong. If you know that you took your breaststroke breath timing wrong, it should bother you. It should bother you enough to stop what you're doing and try and fix it, right? And that's our goal to get to. You don't have to wait for coach to tell you that your breaststroke breath timing was wrong. You don't have to wait for coach to tell you that your butterfly kick was out of sync, right? You can feel it. And with deep practice, we're going to build those myelin sheaths around our nerves so that we can fire it and we can feel when something's wrong, stop immediately, make a correction on that very next step. Deep practice is difficult, it's tiring, and it requires your whole attention. When you talk to some of the most skilled athletes, musicians, artists, authors, the top of their field, and how they describe their most productive practice sessions, what are the words that they're using to describe it? They use words like attention, connect, whole, build, alert, fail, repeat, focus. You don't hear them use words like easy, effortless, smooth, right? And it just cements the idea that productive practice that is actually making you better at accomplishing your skill, is hard, and it requires work, and it requires struggle. You reach, you fall, and you reach again. Deep practice requires you to fail. It requires you to struggle, but you're not failing for the sake of failing, and you're not struggling for the sake of struggling. You're struggling with a specific skill that you're trying to get better at, because that means that you're trying to work on a skill that you haven't obtained yet, that you don't have in your arsenal. And I think, just to sum it up, one way to think about deep practice, one way to focus our practice sessions when we get back in the water, how can we implement deep practice? Pick a target, reach for it, evaluate the gap between what your target was and where your reach ended, and then go back to step one and do it again.